Hello kids, this is Mr. Whistler with your video lesson of the day, and today we are going to be talking about the Trail of Tears. First vocab word is relocate, to force a person or group of people to move. 8th grade, to move, causes bad feelings between groups of people. Back in 1838, the federal government relocated the several Indian tribes in the southeastern United States, over to the Indian Territory, which is present-day Oklahoma. Our second word is Trail of Tears. The Cherokees forced move from Georgia to the Indian Territory in 1838, where the Cherokee had to walk to Oklahoma, and many died. The journey was too hard for them. Caused bad feelings between the Native Americans and the white man. So in the 1830s, the United States had expanded westward, but there were still large numbers of Native Americans living in the east. The United States and the federal government wanted the Indians to adopt the white man's ways, and a lot did not. They just continued to live their traditional way, but a few did. And the tribes that did, they called the civilized tribes. They were the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw. They established farming societies with successful economies. By the early 1800s, the Cherokee had their own schools, newspaper, and written constitution. They basically had their own country within a country. The Cherokee farmed some of Georgia's best farmland as well. And in 1829, gold was discovered there, and settlers, miners, and land speculators began trespassing on Indian land. Once gold was discovered there, you were not going to keep the white man off of that land. Settlers wanted the Indian land, so they wanted the government to relocate the Indians. And President Jackson at the time agreed with the settlers. Jackson's background as an old Indian fighter, he probably had bad feelings toward them anyway, but that wasn't the thing. Jackson knew that the white men would not stop until they got the land. He knew if the white men tried to take the Cherokee land, the Cherokee would fight back and lives would be lost on both sides. Eventually, just from a sheer number standpoint, the Indians would be wiped out. They just didn't have the number of people that the white men did, and eventually they would be wiped off the face of the earth. So he had a tough decision to make. Does he go down in history as the president who took the Indians' land, or does he go down in history as the president who lets the Indians get annihilated? So he thought it was best if they were moved. Well, as they were debating the Indian Removal Act in Congress, Jackson sent a letter. And in his letter, he tries to persuade Congress to move the Indians. And is it supposed that the wandering savage has a stronger attachment to his home than the settled civilized Christian? Is it more afflicting to him to leave the graves of his fathers than it is to our brothers and children? Rightly considered, the policy of the general government toward the red man is not only liberal but generous. He is unwilling to submit to the laws of the states and mingle with their population. To save him from this alternative, or perhaps utter annihilation, the general government kindly offers him a new home and proposes to pay the whole expense of his removal and settlement. Well, this must have worked because Congress passes the Indian Removal Act in 1830. It basically said the government was going to move the Indians and pay for it. So next, they needed a place for them to go. Now, because the area west of the Mississippi was dry and seemed unsuitable for farming, few Americans lived there, so this seemed like the perfect place to move the Indians to. So in 1834, Congress creates the Indian Territory, which is present-day Oklahoma. Well, the Cherokee in Georgia refused to give up their land. They had treaties that dated back to the 1790s with the federal government under Washington's administration that had recognized the Cherokee as a separate nation with their own laws. Georgia, however, never recognized them as a separate nation. Now, you can see right here that states' rights is even involved in this issue of Indian removal. The federal government made treaties with the Indians and said you can stay in Georgia, but the Georgia state government, who thinks they're more powerful than the federal government, never recognized those treaties or never recognized those laws. Georgia is like, you're telling me you told the Indians they could stay in Georgia, our state. So to Georgia, it's ridiculous that the federal government even thought that they could do that. So in 1832, the Cherokee sue the state government of Georgia, and it goes to the Supreme Court. And the court case is called Worcester versus Georgia. Well, John Marshall, if you'll remember from the Midnight Judges, is still the head Supreme Court justice. And he rules in favor of the Indians. He said they did not have to leave. Well, Jackson still supports Georgia and ignores the ruling. He said, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Jackson knew that if he enforced the Supreme Court's decision, the Indians would eventually be annihilated. So he decided to move them anyway. So the federal government persuaded some Cherokee to sign a treaty giving up their land, but most of the 17,000 did not sign the treaty. The Cherokee wrote a letter of protest to Congress. We are aware that some persons suppose it would be for our advantage to remove beyond the Mississippi. We think otherwise. We wish to remain on the land of our fathers. We have a perfect and original right to remain without interruption or molestation. The treaties with us and the laws of the United States made in pursuance of treaties guarantee our residence and our privileges and secure us against intruders. Our only request is that these treaties may be fulfilled and these laws executed. Well, the letter didn't matter, and in 1838 the Trail of Tears began in Georgia. General Winfield Scott with 7,000 troops forced the Indians to move. The aged, the young, thousands died. Here's the route they took. And here is a newspaper account of part of that event. On Tuesday evening, we fell in with a detachment of poor Cherokee Indians, about 1,100 Indians. We found them in the forest, camped for the night by the roadside, under a severe fall of rain accompanied by a heavy wind. With their canvas for a shield from the inclemency of the weather and the cold, wet ground for a resting place, after the fatigue of the day, they spent the night. Many of the aged Indians were suffering extremely from the fatigue of the journey. Several were then quite ill, and one aged man, we were informed, was then in the last struggles of death. So you can see this newspaper editor, he's kind of sympathetic to the Indians' plight. Well, not all the Indians went peacefully. In 1832, a Sauk chief named Blackhawk led a force of Sauk and Fox people back to Illinois to recapture their own land, and they were slaughtered. So in this instance, Jackson was right. The Indians really never had a chance. They were going to have to move, or they were going to have to adopt the white man's ways and move into white man's society, which wouldn't have been very easy either. with the racism that went on, especially in these days. There was one tribe that did successfully resist, though. There was a Seminole chief by the name of Osceola, and the Seminoles were in Florida, and what they did was they hid out in the swamps of Florida, and they used guerrilla tactics against the United States Army, and when they saw them, they would ambush them, and then they would retreat back into the swamps and hide. And so the United States government fought the Seminoles for about 7 years, and after 1,500 American soldiers were killed, the government finally gave up and just let them stay. Now, that was just a small group of Seminoles. A lot of the Seminoles were moved to the Indian Territory, but not all of them left, and this one small band resisted and got to stay in Florida. But many died from this, and it was hard on the Indians as well. So, in 1842, when it was all said and done, the Indians had given up 100 million acres of land. They got $60 million and 32 million acres of land in the Indian Territory. And you can see the breakup here. Here's the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Cherokee, more Cherokee over here, the Cheyenne. And then you can see a small little area where the Seminole is, and their area is smaller because, remember, not all of them came. There were some of them that resisted and stayed in Florida. So the 5 civilized tribes ended up in the Indian Territory, and they created another farming society and basically started over and were successful there. So there's some people that they're so industrious, or they're just going to be successful whatever you do to them and wherever they go, and the Cherokee were like this. All right, that's the Trail of Tears. Here's your Trail of Tears notebook. I want you to put this map on there and color it, and I want you to answer these questions. And I would like you to read the letter from the Cherokee, read the letter from Jackson, and I want you to write a persuasive essay telling me which argument you think is more persuasive. Do you support your answer with evidence from the letters. So do you think the Indians' argument is more persuasive, or do you think Jackson's argument is more persuasive, but use information from the letters to back up your claim? And kids, that's it, and have a good day.